Clive Barker's Jericho is a horror first-person shooter where you play as the Jericho team, a special forces unit sent into a mysterious city called Al-Khali, where a renegade cultist is trying to unleash a powerful being onto mankind. The game is available on PC, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360.
What do you think they'll do with you when there's no one left to burn?
Atmosphere. Whilst the game takes you through various time periods from modern day to ancient Rome and antiquity, there's one thing that continues all the way through the fractured time zones in Al-Khali, and that's suffering. From people just maimed and killed laying about the place to souls crucified and still somehow alive moaning in pain, there's a vile atmosphere from exploring the streets. The beautiful architecture is juxtaposed by the horrific things that are going on in them. Whilst the game's combat takes center stage for the experience, you still get enough time to be wowed or horrified by the environments, flesh pits and tunnels. Truly everything is lost in this place. The atmosphere, though, doesn't change a great deal throughout the game. It's disgusting and there's never really a break from it. The combat does give you other things to focus on, but the combat itself is also vile, exploding heads and shooting enemies in the back until their wounds split open reminds you of Hellraiser in the same way that hearing the name Clive Barker does. Leather, blood, and the lines blur between eroticism and gore. The opening can be a bit dull as it takes a while to get to the more interesting locales, and some of the combat can get incredibly tedious in the longer fights, but the feeling of being somewhere unholy and horrible never really lets up. That's one Harry Mason.
We watched as he turned Al-Khali into a carnival of decadence and depravity.
Scares. The game trades out jump scares for quick-time events that it's famous for. The events themselves weren't very hard to pass on a modern day PC, but they didn't really add much in the way of fear either. If you happened to make a mistake, you just did it again with barely any time wasted. The combat itself is more repetitive than frightening, with your teammates going down frustratingly quickly and needing to be revived a little too often. The enemy designs can be pretty great, with Roman centurions with their muscles on the outside and other gigantic monsters covered in blood, pustules and other things, but the variety for the length of the game is what lets it down. Considering combat is such a large part of the game, it would have been nicer to see more variety, or shorter levels. The game is a fun, gory time, but it doesn't really manage to have any frightening moments. That's still one Harry Mason.
Jesus, that was close.
Sound design. Thunderous choirs invoke the feeling of the time periods at play. The soundtrack is both glorious and depraved. String sections, horns, pounding drums, and that choir remind you that doom is coming and add a lot of weight to the combat. There's some creepy pieces with eerie chanting voices that sound woeful, like they've already given up hope. The music for Jericho is truly epically constructed. The sound effects can get a bit repetitive, especially the gun sounds, though some of them can be pretty satisfying. Bullets hitting metal is a very old sound effect, but still a satisfying one regardless. The squelching of heads popping and walking through fleshy floors is always fun to hear, but it does get hard to appreciate singular sound effects when there's so many things usually going on at once, multiple guns firing and voice lines all layering over each other. There's a lot of environmental sounds like torches and wailing in the distance that also adds a lot to the atmosphere as well. The voice acting for some of the characters is pretty great. Cole recalling the golden ratio was done really well.
Is that what you called it?
This isn't real! Nothing here is real!
How did that number go, Simone? You called it something. Phi?
Phi! Phi! The divine proportion.
Phi, right. How did that go?
1.6, 180,
Good. Now, let's lower the gun.
7498.
But the voice acting isn't hurt by its quality as it is by its frequency, with most characters having voice lines for reloading, asking for ammo, explosions, actions, and powers, as well as random things they say in combat, which means people are always talking, and the same voice lines are repeated very frequently, which can get grating over longer sessions. The reverb is functional, though not hugely noticeable, and the directional audio is really well implemented as well. The sound design itself has no flaws, but the repetition of some things can be annoying. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. The gore is incredible and usually everywhere, from the dark red blood and chunks of brain that explode outwards when you make a headshot, to the rivers of blood and melted remains, piles of corpses and blood splatters are everywhere you look. The consistency of it is usually very high, but unlike other games where it would become desensitizing, there's always something new in the next area to give you something to gross you out or marvel at. Even one of the characters draws blood from their palm with a knife to cast magic spells. It's literally everywhere you look, and it's awesome. Truly a game that Clive Barker made. That's 3 Harry Masons. Story. The story follows Jericho Squad, a special forces unit of people with unique powers that travel into the desert to the ruins of Al-Khali, one of the oldest cities in the world that every major conqueror has at one point fought over. What are they looking for? God's firstborn. In mythology, an entity God created in his own image but sickeningly twisted and wielding inconceivable power. The story is surprisingly deep and includes a lot of historical events with Templars and First World War veterans making appearances as you travel through the various time zones. You meet characters who explain their plight and what's going on in each time zone, as well as imparting their knowledge of the Firstborn. The story isn't the biggest deal when it comes to a first-person shooter that focuses as hard onto the combat as a game like Jericho does, but it's really great that the story is as involved as it is, with loading screens telling you little snippets as well as cutscenes and in-game dialogue where characters reveal things to each other. It didn't need to be this deep, but it is, making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Jericho's biggest flaw is that the gameplay lacks variety, and for a horror game standpoint, it's not frightening, but it's atmospheric, gory, and I'd heard the game was worse than I ended up actually finding it. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I loved looking at the architecture, I didn't touch anything and advise you don't either. There will always be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go jack up bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.